Okay, listen up. We all know the story of the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, the apple, the serpent, temptation getting kicked out. It's huge.
Exactly. It's one of the most foundational narratives in history. Usually framed around sin, disobedience, maybe divine punishment.
Right, that's the standard take.
But what if that entire framing is fundamentally wrong? What if that famous story isn't what we think it is at all?
That's a big what if.
It is. And that's the radical premise at the heart of the source material we're diving into today. We're exploring a pretty groundbreaking theory proposed by Dr. Mamujan Kuchkarov.
The Odom Tilley theory, right?
OT theory, that's the one. Odom Tilley. And it offers a complete reinterpretation of the Eden narrative. Really turns it on its head.
Okay, so what's our mission here? What are we trying to get out of this?
Our mission, really, is to unpack this theory. We're going to pull out the most surprising, maybe the most insightful nuggets from the sources we have, including stuff detailing Dr. Kuchkarov's work itself.
And explore this idea that Eden wasn't about humanity's fall from grace.
Exactly, but about the rise of something absolutely fundamental, something core to who and what we are.
Interesting. So, according to this theory, Eden isn't strictly a religious myth.
Not in the traditional sense, no. It's presented more as a codified memory, maybe even a genetic memory of humanity's first moment of structured vocal articulation.
Wow. So, the birth of complex sound.
Yeah, it marks the rise, not the fall, the rise of what Dr. Kuchkarov calls phonosemantic consciousness.
Phonosemantic consciousness.
Well,
Okay, break that down a bit.
Essentially, it's the moment our brains became wired to link sounds with meaning, with patterns, with the world around us.
Got it. The start of symbolic sound.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this a bit more, because the theory's central claim really does flip the script. It argues that the story, Adam, Eve, the forbidden fruit, it's actually a profound phonosemantic allegory.
An allegory for what exactly?
It's encoding the very birth of verbal intelligence in humans, how we started using meaningful sounds.
Right, so it completely redefines the players in the setting then.
Totally. In this interpretation, from the source material, Adam isn't just the first man. He represents the first sentient biological system capable of phonetic coding.
Meaning, capable of making and processing sounds that hold meaning.
Yes, through direct interaction with his environment. He's the biological apparatus, you could say, ready for language to emerge.
Okay, Adam as the biological system, what about the serpent?
Well, according to this theory, the serpent wasn't a deceiver, not the bad guy.
No, then what?
A stimulus, an environmental trigger that initiated something crucial. And the tree, not a moral test, the source presents it as a kind of phonetic generator, or maybe a source of interaction that leads to sound.
A phonetic generator, how would that work?
Well, the idea is that the interaction itself, maybe with the tree or the serpent near the tree, produced or highlighted specific sounds or patterns that Adam could then perceive and eventually mimic or code.
Okay, so it's about the sound environment.
Exactly. And then eating the fruit.
Yeah.
That wasn't an ethical transgression at all. It was the first moment of symbolic cognition.
The mind making that leap.
Yes. Connecting external stimuli, like a sound or a sight, with internal meaning through sound. It was the recognition of sound, sensation, and sign all coming together.
Sound, sensation, and sign.
The theory actually calls this the trinity of human language, that initial cognitive spark.
That's a powerful reframing. It shifts everything away from disobedience towards a fundamental cognitive event, the birth of meaning almost.
Precisely. Now, here's where the theory, as presented in the source material, gets, let's say, highly controversial.
Okay, I'm braced.
It makes a very bold claim about how this original narrative, this phonosemantic story, was used later in human history.
Used how?
The source argues that a great civilizational deception occurred, and it wasn't primarily spiritual, it was semantic.
Semantics, about the meaning of words, the meaning of the story itself.
Yes, exactly that. The theory claims the Eden narrative was, well, allegedly hijacked, deliberately reinterpreted by religious and political elites much, much later.
Hijacked. For what purpose?
The asserted goal, according to the source, to condition generations into believing they are inherently born guilty, fundamentally flawed.
Why would they do that?
Because it makes people significantly easier to control. If you believe you're inherently bad or indebted from birth.
You're more likely to seek external authority and absolution.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a heavy accusation from the source material.
It is. The source argues that what it calls the theological industrial complex, quite a term, actively replaced this original sort of empirical truth about language origins.
The phonosemantic origin.
And replaced it with these guilt-based narratives. And this purportedly undermined individual self-agency, our power to think and act for ourselves.
And it redefined God, too, you mentioned.
Yeah. From this perspective, God was originally understood, maybe metaphorically, as an anatomical coder, the source of our biological capacity for language, but was redefined by later powers as a punisher, a judge.
So the theory suggests that by framing the origin of speech, something so fundamental to being human as a sinful act,
They instilled a deep, pervasive sense of guilt about our very nature, about our own voices even, which then ensured obedience both theologically and politically.
that's the conclusion drawn in the source material. It claims this displacement, moving the origin of speech into the realm of sin, ensured linguistic disempowerment, fostered theological obedience, and promoted political docility.
Right. The source controversially suggests that humanity was, in effect, recoded, not by God, but by human rulers in God's name.
Okay, presenting that purely as the theory's claim from the source. It really is a radical challenge to traditional interpretations. Completely changes how you see the story.
And it forces you to look at the serpent figure in a totally different light.
Which you mentioned earlier, that the serpent isn't the villain here.
Which leads us to where this gets even more fascinating, I think. Let's circle back to the serpent. The Odom Tilley theory views the serpent as the real teacher in this whole scenario.
The teacher, not the tempter.
Not the tempter. According to the source, the theory highlights the Hebrew word for serpent, the hash. Now, what's striking is that this word also means to whisper, or to produce sh sounds.
Ah, the hiss.
Exactly. Dr. Kuchkaroff, as quoted in the source, argues this is no mere coincidence. It's fundamentally linked.
How so?
The serpent is seen as the first phonetic mirror for human articulation, potentially the first distinct external sound that early humans interacted with may be mimicked, helping to shape our first speech sounds.
So the sound itself is the catalyst, the sh or sh.
That's the idea presented, and the source provides some pretty compelling cross-linguistic phonosemantic parallels that Dr. Kuchkaroff uses to support this. Think about these examples from different languages.
Okay, lay them out. I'm curious.
Right, so nash in Uzbek, it means a carved or fixed pattern. The theory links this visually to the shape of a coiled snake.
Okay, the physical form. Makes
Right.
sense.
Snake in English. Pretty obvious, right? It clearly contains the hiss sound. And even the movement your mouth makes saying it kind of mimics a slithering, maybe a stretch, but the sound is there.
Yeah, the S is definitely prominent.
Then serpent in Latin, it comes from serper, which means to crawl. Again, reflects the body movement.
Movement linked directly to the word. Got it.
Chi in Japanese. It's used in onomatopoeia words that imitate sounds, specifically to describe silent or slithering movement.
Another link. Sound, movement, the serpent idea, across cultures.
And sei in Chinese Mandarin. Specifically in the term sushi for snake, it includes that characteristic hissing S phone once more.
There's that es sound again. They're a language family entirely.
And one more. Sapna in Sanskrit means one who creeps, which the theory presents as a foundational root connecting back to the serpent's movement.
So what's fascinating here, what the theory is pointing out, is how all these different languages from diverse parts of the world seem to encode similar sounds or movements related to the serpent.
Exactly. It suggests this points to a deeper shared linguistic root, something stemming from this primordial interaction. It's like the sound and the shape left a universal trace in language itself.
A phonosemantic echo of that first encounter.
Right. And the theory takes this idea, the serpent, sound, knowledge, form being intertwined, and connects it to another, maybe surprising place, the concept of science.
Science, modern science, how does that connect?
Yes. The source posits this universal law, okay, shared by both physics and Odom Tilley. Nothing disappears, nothing appears out of nothing, essence only transforms.
The conservation principle, like E equals mc.
Exactly like EMC fell, where energy and mass are just different forms of the same underlying essence. Now, according to Dr. Kuchkaroff's theory, the SCI root, in the word science,
SCI.
it echoes this very truth through its sound and its form. The source quotes him directly here. SCI is not a sequence of letters. It is the linguistic body of the serpent of knowledge. It shifts its shape, not its soul.
Whoa. All right. So SCI, the letters in science, are being presented as linguistic echo of the serpent, representing knowledge, transformation, the very essence of that conservation principle.
That's the connection the theory proposes. It's framed as this hidden structure within human cognition, encoded in phonosemantics and the sound meaning link.
Like a deep code in our language.
Yeah. And the source even claims this connection, not just physically, but symbolically and linguistically, was studied in places like Ulebek's observatory way back centuries before Einstein.
That's quite a claim, suggesting that science itself, the word, the concept, might be fundamentally linked to this ancient linguistic root about knowledge and transformation, symbolized by the serpent.
It's definitely a significant claim. And it leads directly to another bold assertion from the Odom Tilia theory,
Which is?
that there is only one original language, Odom and Tilia, and all modern languages are just derivatives of it.
One single source language for all of humanity, like a proto-world language.
Kind of, yeah. Odom Tili is presented as this foundational tongue. Modern languages are seen as variations shaped by geography, culture, migration, all those factors.
Okay, so where did the words of this Odom Tili come from, according to the theory?
They originated directly from those physical, emotional, and sensoromotor interactions, between Adam, Eve, the serpent, the tree, in that initial environment.
The interactions generated sounds.
Exactly. Those interactions, the source claims, generated spontaneous, repeatable sound patterns, and those became the first words, based on actual physical experience and biological responses.
So, language didn't just pop into existence arbitrarily. It emerged organically from how early humans interacted with their world, using sound in their bodies.
Right. The source uses a helpful analogy here. Think about the decimal system, base 10.
Okay, based on 10 fingers.
Exactly. It's rooted in our biology. The theory argues that, in the same way, all languages are ultimately expressed through biologically encoded sounds that originated from that foundational Eden interaction. Our physical form dictated the basic structure.
That makes it feel more concrete, less abstract.
Yes.
Language tied to the body.
Totally. And consider the example the source gives with the sound A. Think about a newborn baby's first cry. Right? The theory argues this isn't taught, it's programmed, it's inherent. A is presented as representing the beginning of space, of breath, of time, the alpha of sound.
The first outward breath, maybe.
Perhaps. And this is why, according to the theory, pretty much every alphabet in the world begins with A. It's not just a cultural choice, it's seen as a phonosemantic inevitability rooted in our biology.
A as the fundamental sound of opening, of existence. That gives a whole new weight to the start of the alphabet.
Doesn't it? And within this Odom Tili framework, the very nature of language is described in a very specific way. It claims every foam, every distinct sound unit, like K or M or A, corresponds directly to a gesture, a feeling, and a shape.
Gesture, feeling, and shape for every single sound.
That's the claim. A movement of the body, an internal emotional or physical state, and an external perception of form, all linked to the sound itself.
So meaning isn't created by grammar rules in the way we usually think.
Not primarily, no. The theory argues meaning comes from this inherent body-based coding system, the connection between the sound, the body's action or feeling, and the perceived shape in the world.
So language is fundamentally tied to our physical body, our internal state, and how we perceive the external world through shapes and forms. It's biosymbolic.
That's the exact term used in the source. Biosymbolic, not just symbolic. The Eden episode is framed as a sonic genesis.
Sonic genesis. I like that.
Yeah, the moment where man's biology and the material world met an encoded reality through sound and physical interaction.
Biosymbolic language.
Yeah.
That concept really resonates with the idea of sound being linked to gesture, feeling, shape. Language embedded in our very biology.
Yeah. Now, given how profoundly this theory reinterprets such a foundational story, and challenges so many established ideas about language, history, even human nature.
You have to wonder why it isn't more widely known, right, or discussed.
Exactly. And the source offers a pretty clear argument for why this theory might be, well, actively suppressed or ignored.
Let me guess. It steps on too many toes. Challenges existing power structures, academic fields.
That's precisely the core of the argument presented in the source. It claims the theory directly threatens major existing paradigms. Like religious orthodoxy, which often relies on those guilt-based narratives and ideas of submission we talked about, political systems that benefit from control and docility.
Makes sense. What about academia?
And even certain schools of academic linguistics. The source describes them as being potentially stuck in structuralist illusions.
You mean like Chomsky's universal grammar, focusing on abstract syntax? Or Saussure's ideas about the arbitrary link between signifier and signify?
Yes. The source explicitly mentions those kinds of approaches. It argues that by proposing language is inherently anatomical, emotional, universal, and rooted in physical interaction.
The OT theory basically disrupts all these established structures, including what the source calls colonial linguistic hierarchies. which is interesting.
Right. It's a theory that shakes the foundations of how we understand human nature, where knowledge comes from, and the systems we use to interpret them.
So what's the final takeaway from the theory as the source presents it?
That's the ultimate conclusion presented in the source material for Dr. Kuchkarov's theory. It summarizes the reinterpretation. The Eden story was never actually about punishment or exile from some perfect state.
It was about...
At its core, it was about phonetic awakening, about linguistic expression, the birth of meaningful sound.
So the true tree of knowledge. It isn't something forbidden we should regret touching. It's something we've maybe forgotten the true meaning of.
Exactly. And its fruit isn't sin, it's speech itself. Our ability to communicate complex ideas through sound.
And serpent, once demonized,
might have been our first true teacher, in the most literal sense, introducing the sounds, the interactions that formed the very basis of human language.
So according to this theory, the return to Eden isn't about regaining some lost paradise out there.
No, it's about returning to an understanding of our own voice, the nature of sound itself, and the deep biosymbolic roots of our language within us.
That's a powerful final message from the source material on this theory.
Phew, okay. That was quite a journey, wasn't it?
Definitely. Reinterpreting one of humanity's most foundational stories through this really radical lens of language origins and the inherent power of sound.
We've explored the idea that the serpent wasn't a tempter, but maybe a teacher. That eating the fruit was about a crucial cognitive leap into language, not a sin.
And that our very languages, the sounds and shapes of words, might hold echoes of this primordial event.
This deep dive into the source material certainly presents a theory that challenges, deeply held traditional views and suggests this hidden fundamental connection
between sound, meaning, knowledge, and maybe even the underlying structure of the universe itself, all through phonosemantics.
So what does all this mean for you, listening in? As you process this theory, what stands out most? This radical reinterpretation of Eden, the origin of speech. Does any of it click?
Does the idea of language being biosymbolic, tied intrinsically to gesture, feeling, shape, does that resonate with you in any way?
It certainly gives you something fundamental to think about, doesn't it? The next time you hear an S sound, or see the letter A, or just consider how we make meaning out of thin air, or maybe out of breath in biology.